Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Leela Squires, and I am a developer advocate here at Bitrise. And I want to welcome you to the panel we are having about Swift 5.7 and beyond. I am here with Antoine and Vincent, and we're going to be talking all about Swift 5.7, 5.8, and what's to come with Swift 6. Now, I'm here to talk about mostly what's going to be happening in 5.7, and I would love to hear Vincent's and Antoine's ideas of what they want to bring to the table with this chat. Antoine?
Yeah, so for me, it's mostly exciting to talk about the future of Swift. I'm really looking forward to what Swift 6 has to bring, and I won't give away all the teasers just yet, but yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me over. Looking forward to chat.
Hey Leila, so like you said, what I'm quite excited about in this new version of Swift is the many changes to the generic system, because there was a status quo for quite a few years, and that has changed, and I think it's definitely worth discussing.
And before we get started, we do have a poll set up for anybody that is watching in our audience, and we want to know, when it comes to migrating over to the latest release from Apple, whether it be Swift, Xcode, whatever the case is, are you dedicating your time and energy to the project as soon as possible? And we're talking about getting a jump as soon as Apple releases it to get your features updated and start working on it? Or are you doing it at a later date? And once things like dependencies are updated and are giving a growing number of users are using the newest versions, and there's a little more help with troubleshooting. So be sure to let us know what your preference is as a developer in your organization. Okay, we're going to start off with 5.7, some of the great tips and tricks. And I know we discussed a little bit behind the scenes about what's to come with what's coming with 5.7, sorry, I should say. And one of the bigger things that I thought was really cool is, of course, like some of the shorthand help that Swift has given us. Do either of you have any real opinions or feelings about that?
It's one of those little ones, right? Like the little changes that you feel like, how much does it really add? But once you get your hands dirty with it and you start to change your whole project, it's just, I don't know, it makes much more sense, and it looks a little cleaner to me.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Vincent?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Antoine. It's the change. It's small, but it's going to happen in so many places that actually it will have a very nice impact. And one thing I especially like about this feature is that this was not implemented by someone at Apple, but rather by someone from the community, actually. So it shows that if you have an idea and also the time to defend it and implement it, it can make its way all the way to an official release.
And I feel like we're seeing that more now that they're setting up this more Apple-focused developer community. And I'm hoping that we're going to see a lot more of this, more community members inputting ideas and solutions to make development a lot easier, a lot cleaner for people. Now, I want to discuss a bit more detail, because I know with this shorthand, like as I was a developer going in first learning, I would make this mistake and always not make an instance of whatever object that I was trying to work on. So it is a lot nicer and a lot cleaner. So a lot of the example code that we see here looks like my first time around when I was writing an app. Now, Antoine or Vincent, do you guys have experience using this new shorthand, and maybe possibly some tricks on how to migrate over to it?
Yeah, so actually, I didn't do the migration for PhotoHome, but my colleague Frank did it, and he ran a nice little regular expression that we found online. So the nice thing in Xcode is that when you do search, you can actually do a search with a regex and replace according to the regular expression. So by implementing that regex, you can just migrate all the instances in your project with basically one click. And it's something that I guess I can only recommend you give it a try. Normally, the change is checked by the compiler. So if something goes wrong, the compiler should be able to catch it. And what's funny is that if you work in a team, before you launch it, you can start bets with your teammates on how many occurrences do you think is going to change, you know. And for us, it was actually a bit less than what we thought, because it doesn't work for like sub properties of objects. That's why you have less than you would think. But it's interesting to make like this bet. I think for us it was in the hundreds, but I would have thought closer to 1,000. I think it was more like 100 or 200, but I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, it depends on the project size, obviously, right? But the regex, that was quite funny. It became quite trendy on Twitter, and I believe many started to adopt this new feature by seeing that regex, because you don't want to do it all manually. You know, can you imagine going over your project and having to do that 100 times, even finding those? I think we did it as well at WeTransfer. We changed our whole code base. We didn't do a bet, and I also don't have numbers. Sorry for that. But what we also thought about is, you know, like doing it now once doesn't mean we stop us from doing it again, right? Like you need to write new code as well in this format. So it's great to see linters like SwiftLint and Swift format. They both have at least a beta release ready where you can add new rules to ensure that this is the new standard in your code base. And that will kind of enforce you to write these if shorthand statements. And that allows us to constantly keep our code up to date with this new feature.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I think it's really important. I think that once something like this gets released, that everybody go through and kind of clean up their code. And I know everybody hates tech debt and stuff like that, but using that really nice find and replace, it does make things a lot easier. If only cleaning up tech debt is normally that easy, things would be, I think, a lot more smoother for a lot of devs. Now, another option that came out with 5.7 was some of the rejects with the regular expressions. I do have some code examples here if you guys want to discuss a little bit further. And I'm interested a lot in how a lot of this text is built based off of this data, right?
Yeah, so to me, what's interesting about this whole new feature, if you look at this year's WWDC, it was brought as one of the biggest new releases in Swift 5.7. You know, there was quite some dedicated time to it. And I'm not sure about you, Vincent, but if I look at my projects that I work on a daily basis, it's rarely that I have to write a regex. And if I do, you know, I really need to get myself back up to speed because it's been a while, and I opened those online regex tools to help me verify whether the regex that I copied over from Stack Overflow actually works as expected, right? So in all honesty, this feature, I haven't really played around with it, let alone knowing the background. So hopefully, Vincent, you can shine a light there. But what I can say is that it's pretty cool to look at this feature from like an implementation side of things, right? Like, what is Swift capable of offering in terms of functionality and readable code, and whether you're going to use it or not. It's super cool to play around with it and just explore how this works under the hood.
I think, yeah, I must agree with you, Antoine, on the fact that when you write an app that is your typical user-facing app, regexes are not often the thing you use the most. Maybe even if you use them a lot, it might be a sign that something is wrong in the way like your backend is architectured. But on the other hand, I feel it could be very useful for people who write Swift for the server. I remember people at Vapor were advocating a lot for what they called backend for front end, where basically you have a small middleware in Swift that's going to aggregate several pieces of data from several backends and expose Swift friendly front for the app. And these services, I guess, they could make a lot of use cases of the regexes. Maybe for apps, SDK developers that do some more low-level stuff could find an interest about it. But indeed, like usually when you make an app, you get some data that is already well structured. I would argue it's not the responsibility of the app to recreate a structure that was lost in the data. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that they put it that much upfront. The thing I do find interesting is the fact that we have this nice builder syntax for the regex, because even though you might not use a regex, the fact that Apple is pushing such a syntax, it kind of legitimizes it a lot, and it might give ideas to other teams inside Apple or other like third-party open source frameworks that could use a similar syntax.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, I wonder too, just because, and we're going to be talking about this in a moment with 6, that they are trying to make it a more cohesive language. So it is interesting to see that they're pushing this and to see what they might be bringing coming forward. So going from that, yeah, going into 5.8 and what's coming, Vincent was really great in handing over, reminding us about a really great link if people are interested in what's to come with the latest Swift versions. And we're going to be linking that below, but it is apple.github.io. And you can go ahead and search for the versions that are coming and see what has been implemented and what's coming. We took a peek, 6 isn't available, but we do have 5.8 that is coming. And one of the bigger things that I thought was really interesting, and I'm not sure if you guys did, but with the idea of better debugging and making Swift a more usable language, there was an implementation for adding conformance to the protocol for custom debugging for the string convertible. And I know the example that they give isn't the best one because it's just a very, very simple debugging example with the colors, but I do think it's going to be extremely helpful going forward, especially in my case, I've had problems using structs and building out apps, and the debugging errors that I was getting was never really helpful. So do you guys have an idea or opinions about debugging and how Swift now is going to make it possibly a lot easier for developers to use it?
Yeah, so I think this is a perfect example of those little improvements on the road to Swift 6. Like Swift 6 really wants to make and this is a sneak peek into what we will discuss later, but Swift 6 wants to make our debugging experience much better. And to me, this change will likely not be really visible for people, although they might automatically start using it and just take it for granted, right? Like you kind of expect this to work this way. And at the same time, implementing that protocol yourself or your own custom types can be a great way to add your own input into a better debugging experience. So it's kind of a great example of how you can learn from proposals that get out in the public, right? Like what do they actually do there and why do they do this? And can I do that myself to my own types as well?
Right.
So yeah, I agree. This example, like, okay, it's the team.background color.
Yeah.
Yeah, would I really use it? But yeah, I mean, if you start debugging Swift UI views, maybe eventually these kind of outputs do help you. And maybe we can even, and I'm thinking out loud now, but compare a Swift UI views much better now by printing them out. I'm not sure. I didn't explore this yet, but not for myself.
No, for sure. Possibly, yeah. And maybe do some really interesting things with UI tests. I think
Exactly.
being able to pull those, yeah. How about you, Vincent?
So I think first thing I would want to mention is that the example, actually, I could imagine using it like a few years ago. I tried when they had first released the result builders that were called function builders back then. I had tried to build a builder syntax for tests where you could use key path and operators being overloaded to say, for instance, I want to assert that the count is equal to 3. I want to assert the first element is equal to that element, that kind of thing. And one of the big limitations was the fact that from a key path, you couldn't print in a message what was the actual property. So actually, for this kind of things, it can enable some nice tools. So I agree with Antoine that probably most people won't be writing the tools, but it's very possible that indirectly we will see the benefits of it. And on the same topic, I want to share again, but I've already shared it a lot, that I'm a big advocate of reading Swift evolution proposals, especially for developers who maybe have reached a stage where they want to get better at understanding the language and its direction. Read these proposals. It's where the people who had an idea for a feature, they funded it, so they gave the context, the motivation, the alternatives. Sometimes talk about the edge cases. Like, for instance, if you read the one about key path, you will learn that you can take a key path to a subscript of a collection with a function call for the index, and then it begs the question, when is that function evaluated, when you create a key path or when you invoke it? So you can really learn some like advanced and interesting edge cases by reading these proposals, and they are all available on GitHub. So really, like, there are like 300 of them today. You can like pick one or two at random, give them a try. Some of them are very low level, some can be very technical, some are very accessible. And I can only recommend that developers have a look at it, because I think it's a great way to grow your understanding of the language.
And that kind of segues us to what's coming up next. So the road to Swift 6, as Apple likes to call it, or as I have it, is expanding towards Swift 6, because it really, to me, is an expansion of what they've been releasing in the most recent versions of Swift. Now, there are a ton of things that have already been approved for or accepted for Swift 6. And kind of going off of what you were just saying, as far as looking into what the latest versions are going to have in the proposals and people going into to learn a bit more about Swift, I do see an update that's coming where you're able to adopt to upcoming language improvements using a new compiler flag to enable those. That's pretty exciting to me, just because I've always had trouble when working with the newest and latest and not being able to really fully implement it because I'm not using Xcode. I'm not using it on my app, right? So it's really, really nice to see that we can just simply turn it on with a flag and be able to use some of these proposed updates. Do you guys think that that's something that you would be using come in the future?
I tell you what, I'm already using some of the compiler flags today.
Nice.
Yeah, so the Swift 6 goal is really, they want to make it a piecemeal adoption, is what they say. And with that, they mean they don't want to disrupt our current development process and certainly drop a whole new way of developing, right? Like the fact that we have Swift 5.7 and later on Swift 5.8 is because they want to slowly introduce the new features and get ourselves used to what the new version of Swift will bring. An example is existential any, whereas today it's kind of more or less an opt-in, and in Swift 6 you need to be using any for all existentials. The flag that I'm talking about right now is the strict concurrency check. It shows you kind of like extra warnings about the concurrency code that you wrote, that you need to use the sendable protocol and all those kind of warnings. You can enable it today if you want, and that allows you to already optimize your code ahead of Swift 6, but do it at a time that works for you. And then by the time that Swift 6 drops, you're kind of prepared in a way.
Nice.
So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a super nice gesture from the team that I really, care about our productivity and how we need to adopt to the new language.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it definitely like contrasts a lot to the migration from Swift 2 to Swift 3, when they had renamed a lot of method, and many teams, including the one I was in at the time, had to spend like maybe 1 or 2 weeks just like migrating the project and not able to do anything. So that's a welcome improvement.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, like it goes into my poll that we have earlier of like, when do people start migrating and when do they feel it's safe and how quickly can they get it done? Whenever there's a release in my developer days, it's always kind of just like, should we do it? Do we do it? We're waiting for our DevOps people to give us the go ahead. It's always kind of like a whirlwind. So it's nice to see that the earliest that we can start implementing and updating and migrating, and the better. And it's nice that Apple sees that and is giving us a little more leeway, a little more wiggle room when it comes to it. Are there any of the other coming attractions, as I said, or accepted proposals for Swift 6 that you guys are excited about from this list?
Well, I think one thing that's maybe not represented in proposals today, but what does excite me is the things they want to improve in regards to the development experience. I think that there's the road to Swift 6, which you can read as well on the forums, and they talk about faster build times, better debugging experience, and code completion that you can rely on, right? Like Those are kind of like the things we take for granted, but that don't always work as great as we wish they were. And the same with memory ownership. You know, they want to make simple things simple and difficult things possible, which is probably as well why we have all those difficult keywords and intimidating options in Swift today. But yeah, I believe, you know, if you look at the website shared earlier from the Swift Evolution proposals, and you filter on Swift 5.7, which was the major release of WWDC, it's a really big list. It's over 30 proposals. And the minor releases in between often have less proposals. And what I want to say with that is that by the time Swift 6 arrives, I'm pretty sure it will be WWDC, that, you know, it's such a major release. We'll be surprised with proposals that I think aren't that visible beforehand, maybe, or at least improvements that might not be related to proposals, let's say it like that. So I'm super keen to see what that will bring, you know, like if they are actually acting up to what they promised with the roadmap to Swift 6.
For sure. And speaking of the roadmap to 6, and you mentioned it before, I do want to highlight the really awesome article that they have about what's to come and what they're doing. And it does boil down to those 3 like main components. And it's building a programming language to help everyone be able to create apps on any platform. Now, what that sounds like to me, and I'm not sure how for real this might be, is a cross-platform development, right? Being able to use Xcode and possibly Swift to maybe create some apps in Android, and maybe do some of that. We don't know, but when you say all platforms or any platform, that's what I hear. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
World domination is what Chris Nuttner once said, right?
For sure.
What do you think, Vincent?
Honestly, it's hard to figure out what they mean by like all platforms, because Apple is always like talking only about Apple, and the other guys are the other guys. Maybe I think they think more about the lines of making it easier to run like on the back end, for instance, compatibility with other languages. There was a big push for that a few years ago with the introduction of the dynamic member lookup and that kind of things. Sometimes I got the feeling, it's a personal feeling, I don't know if it's true or not, but that the Swift team is maybe, at least in what they share publicly, more focused on the language itself than on Swift for iOS. In the past, like there were some pushes for Swift for machine learning, for instance, Swift for TensorFlow. I think they have stopped it since then, but there have been all of these ways to make the language be used in a broader sense, and they focus on it a lot publicly. Maybe also because they cannot talk publicly about how Swift will integrate with iOS in the future, because iOS is still closed source development. They don't share about it that much, so it might be that kind of a bias. I agree with Antoine that if there is a big feature, we might be very surprised by it, because both property wrappers and opaque return types were announced publicly, but there was no clear use case for them. It's only when SwiftUI came up that it was like, oh, okay, that was for it. But property wrappers and function builders were entirely secret at the time. I think they had hid them in a package called like timer, so that no one would take a look inside of it. So we might be surprised indeed.
Yeah, that would be cool. But yeah, it's an interesting angle, right? Looking at how the Swift team looks at Swift, you know, and will they eventually be focused on adding support for building on Android, for example, or is that something that extends on top of the language of Swift, where others add that possibility, right? Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm prepared yet to add like Android developer to my resume yet, but yeah, it's exciting to see where it goes, and I would love to explore other platforms without having to learn a new language, right? I believe we can already do that partly today. So it's in the works, right? We have Swift on the server, you can build on Linux and those kind of things, but yeah, it's once again interesting to see where that goes.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's really I don't want to be flippant in thinking that the words and the phrasing that they're using in these updates are just like, they're just saying it just to say it. They're very precise and very particular about what they're saying here. And I'm excited either way of how it goes. So yeah, and then the second part of the Swift Road to 6, and you mentioned this a little bit, Antoine, is about doing the major investments to make like the developer live or the developer experience as easy as possible. We talk about faster builds, more some Xcode being a bit more responsive, things like that. And then of course that reliable debugging experience that I'm excited about. Now, are there things that you find developers are missing that you think that should be coming, or you would want Apple or the Swift team to implement that we haven't seen yet?
Maybe the one that they've been talking about for quite some time, and from what I understand, it's in the works, but it's a big thing to implement, is the variadic generic arguments. So if you've done Swift UI, for instance, you know that in a VStack or any kind of view, you cannot put more than 10, I think it's 10 or 11 number like that, direct child. And that comes from the fact that you need to implement an overload of a method for each number of child. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and they basically stopped at around 10. And the idea with variadic generic argument is to be able to have a variadic syntax. So what we already have for regular arguments, for instance, when you do like a string ... and then you can pass in several strings and it converts as an array inside the method, to be able to do the same thing for generic arguments, to say, so my method add child can take a variadic number of child, which are a variadic number of types. So it's basically being able to say, okay, I want to have n generic types, where n is a number that is unknown at compile time. And it's a bit of a work, I can totally imagine, but they've been talking about it for some time, and I think the day where it's there, it could lead to, yeah, some nicer ergonomics when you want to write like highly generic code with all the syntaxes like the result builders and stuff.
Yeah, they'll be able to remove quite some code as well from the code base, I believe. It's super nice. Yeah, for me, I'm always keen to see, like you have the keynote and then you have the State of the Union, and I'm always waiting for that one slide where they show like the build time improvements with Xcode 14 or Xcode 15. And I think they improved over the years quite a bit, but feeling wise, the days from Objective-C, that was just almost instant or so, like it felt much better. And now people know that I'm old, Objective-C. I'm not sure if everyone played around with it, but no, either way, like productivity is close to my heart. I'm always trying to find ways to, fix something that will make 5 engineers in my team develop 1 minute faster in over a year. That's, and so on and so on. So I'm keen to see what they can do there, and they're doing improvements every year. We had great improvements this year with getting insights into build performance. Hopefully next year, somehow they can show us even better improvements, for which Swift 6 potentially has a big impact as well, with all the ergonomics that they can finally apply after the whole journey of Swift 5.7 and 5.8.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And me personally, I am all for improving build times. There's been times in the past where I'm sitting there and maybe like 20-30 minutes go by. I've gone and got coffee, got lunch, and next thing I know, the whole day has passed and I forgot to go back to my machine. So improving build times and having that exposed, is a big plus in my opinion.
But this is the thing, right? Like the build times are bigger than just the number, because if it's long enough, you start going on Twitter or whatsoever, and you come back later than the build was actually finished.
Exactly. And the last item, or the last point, I should say, for the Swift 6 Road to 6, is their goal is to make, and you actually quoted this pretty well, Antoine, is to make programming simple things very easy and difficult things possible. And it feels to me a little open-ended, and kind of just like reach for the stars, or reach for the moon, you'll land in the stars, right? Now, do you guys find what do you guys feel is something that's difficult now that you think will be easier come like maybe like Swift 7 or Swift 8? And I know you mentioned it's maybe like machine learning stuff that they kind of like threw away. Do you think maybe stuff like that is going to be coming back and making it a bit easier?
Maybe like first, to give, I have a good example in mind of something that is a feature that is easy things are easy and difficult things are possible. It's the async await syntax, because with this new syntax, all the simple asynchronous code are very easy to deal with. Even some simple complex use cases, like for instance, making a static number of calls in parallel, or I should rather say concurrently, is easy to do with the async-let syntax. And when you want to do something a bit more complicated, you have, for instance, the task group, or you can also create your own tasks. So I think it's a good example of maybe the direction they are going in. The simple use cases should be straightforward, built into the language, and maybe if they can add simple abstractions like async-let, they will do it. And then give you the tools for the more complex use cases. But usually you can see that there is indeed a threshold. I think they made the choice to embed a bit more complexity than they had to, in order to simplify as much as possible simple use cases. And then for the rest, you have the tool and you need to deal with them. But they are tools, they can cut both ways, and you need to be careful.
Yeah, I totally agree with Vincent here. And I think it's also important to realize it's not that Swift 6 will suddenly bring us this, right? Like it's already in the making. And the async await is a perfect example of things that we had to write that was pretty complex and now becomes easier. And what I find interesting with looking at something becoming easier is to look at it from an angle of a fresh, new Swift developer and somebody that's developing for years. I'm more experienced and I have to deal with getting rid of the language that I'm used to, right? And start adopting a new way of writing that might feel weird at first or something that I need to get used to. Whereas somebody that comes new into the language, the generics improvements, for example, with opaque parameter types, they replace like the T where T conforms to protocol shorthand kind of. It's a shorthand for that. If I was new to the language, I would be much easier for me to get used to that part. Whereas right now I had to get rid of that T conforms to where protocol syntax, you know, like the learning curve is a little different, I would say. But yeah, they try to make the programming experience more enjoyable and simpler. And like Vincent said, you know, there's tools to go deeper or more advanced, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I hear what you're saying about the idea of having those habits as a seasoned developer and having to break those habits versus a newer developer, which I still consider myself somewhat of a newer developer, doing it half a decade, but I consider myself a new developer. I'm always learning. So we are at time right now, as far as our wonderful panel is concerned. So like I said, we are having Q&A live right now in the chat that we're answering. So please feel free to continue to ask the questions. And before we sign off, I do want to give Antoine and Vincent a chance to plug whatever podcast, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, whatever you guys got going on. Let people know.
So you can find me on Twitter. My handle is at @v_Friday, but I guess we'll write it somewhere on the screen. I also have a YouTube channel. You can also find the Twitter account iOS Memes. And finally, if you want to give a try to Photoroom, it's available on the App Store. It's basically an app that's meant to make really good looking images if you need to sell on the internet. So if you are an e-commerce, I guess you're not here because this is more for iOS developers. But if, like me, you sell often on Vinted or that kind of websites, it can be useful for you. So give it a try.
Antoine?
Yeah, for me, I'm not going to name my Twitter handle because, like Vincent said, but yeah, you can follow me on avenderly.com, otherwise known as Swiftly. I write articles weekly there, including all kinds of things, as well as productivity and sometimes CI improvement. I also have a newsletter for you to follow. And I think the most interesting part for you is RocketSim that allows you to build apps faster. So check it out, rocketsim.app.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Again, I want to say thank you for coming in to our panel about Swift 5.7 and beyond. Be sure to head back to the Mobile DevOps Summit website to check out our agenda for the next coming panels. And if you do have any more questions, feel free to drop them into our chat and we'll be happy to answer them. So again, thank you again and have a great one. Bye,
Thanks for
guys.
watching.
Thank you.
you.